All right, it's World War II, and the Nazis are out here running their own twisted version of science class. Except instead of beakers and microscopes, it's hypothermia chambers, scalpels, and a whole lot of human suffering. Today we're diving into some of the craziest, most horrifying human experiments that actually happened under Nazi rule. Strap in, this isn't science, it's pure nightmare fuel. Number 1, hypothermia from hell. So the Nazis are obsessed with figuring out how long their Luftwaffe pilots can survive if they get shot down over the icy Atlantic. Sounds like a practical concern, right? But rather than run simulations or, use mannequins like normal people, they go full Bond villain and start experimenting on actual human beings. They set up shop at Dachau concentration camp, and what followed was some of the most sadistic, cold-blooded madness ever passed off as science. Victims, usually political prisoners, Soviet POWs, or anyone the Nazis didn't see as human enough, were stripped completely naked and shoved into vats of ice water. Some were tossed into outdoor tanks in sub-zero weather, and then they were watched for hours. No protection, no anesthesia, just pain. Doctors would stand by with clipboards, literally timing how long it took for the person to lose consciousness. Like it was a messed up stopwatch challenge. Victims would start off shivering violently, screaming, convulsing. Their skin would turn blue, limbs would go stiff, then they'd fall silent. Some were pulled out at the last second, but that wasn't mercy. Oh no. That was phase 2. The rewarming methods, straight out of a medieval horror film. Some were dropped into scalding hot water. Others were rewarmed using body heat, by forcing healthy prisoners to lie naked against their frozen bodies like a living, breathing flesh blanket. And these weren't volunteers. They were ordered to do it under threat of death. The mastermind behind all this, Dr. Sigmund Rascher, and just in case you were wondering what kind of guy runs a human ice torture program, this man once tried to fake his wife's pregnancy by buying a baby on the black market. Yeah, totally normal guy. The goal of all this horror? To figure out the best way to warm up frozen Nazi pilots. The result? Hundreds of people died in pure agony just so the Third Reich could take some notes. There were no breakthroughs, no life-saving discoveries, just cruelty disguised as research. Number 2, Mengelé's twin experiments. Joseph Mengele, aka the Angel of Death, aka how is this guy not literally a demon? Mengele was stationed at Auschwitz, where he ran his own little side quest, except instead of helping anyone, he was out here playing God with twins. Why twins? Because Mengele believed they held the secret to cracking the code of genetics. He wanted to mass-produce Aryan super babies like some deranged eugenics factory. Basically, Nazi science fiction nonsense. So when new prisoners arrived at Auschwitz, Mengele would personally stroll down the line, searching for twins like he was casting for a horror movie. Spot a pair? They were pulled out of the crowd. But instead of being sent to the gas chambers, they were escorted to what looked like a medical wing. But spoiler alert, this was no hospital. It was Mengele's personal torture lab. And what did he do to them? Everything. He'd inject dye into their eyes to try and change the color, just to see what would happen. He'd sew twins together to create makeshift conjoined twins. He'd amputate limbs on one twin and monitor how the other responded. He did forced organ swaps, experimental blood transfusions, and surgeries with zero anesthesia. If one twin died, the other would be killed too, so he could autopsy both for comparison. It was Frankenstein with a scalpel and a god complex. And here's the creepiest part, he was charming, friendly. He'd hand out candy, smile at the kids, treat them like little angels until they woke up on his operating table, strapped down while their siblings screamed from the next cot. He kept meticulous notes on everything, like he was trying to win best in show at some twisted science fair. And did he ever pay for any of it? Nope. He escaped after the war, fled to South America, and lived out the rest of his life chilling in Brazil. He died in 1979, old, free, and never once put on trial. Meanwhile, the twins who survived, most never spoke of it again. Because how do you even begin to explain that kind of trauma? Number 3, wound experiments and mustard gas madness. Okay, so let's say the Nazis wanted to test battlefield injuries. You'd think the logical thing would be to study actual war wounds, right? Observe, document, maybe interview some injured soldiers. Not Nazi logic. Their brilliant idea was, let's just make the wounds ourselves. At Ravensbrück and Sachsenhausen, 2 of the most infamous concentration camps, Nazi doctors turned prisoners, mostly young women, into live-action crash test dummies. They were tied down and deliberately sliced open, shot in the limbs, or had their bones shattered using hammers, on purpose in a laboratory. And just wounding them wasn't enough. They had to spice things up, so they'd rub dirt, glass shards, rusty nails, sawdust, or literal feces into the injuries to make sure they became infected. Because what's medical science without some human compost in the mix, right? Then came the treatments, if you can even call them that. One of their favorites, mustard gas, because the Nazis looked at the Geneva Convention and said, cute. You know, the stuff banned by every civilized nation after World War I for being too horrifying to use on actual enemies. They exposed prisoners to it and then observed the results, meaning they watched the chemical burns, blisters, lung damage, and eventual deaths in real time while taking notes. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, sometimes they'd amputate limbs, not to save anyone, but just to see how infection spread. Other times they'd remove muscles, nerves, or even organs to see how long a person could survive without them. Spoiler alert, not long. And guess what? Most of this was done with zero anesthesia, just raw, agonizing pain. There was no intention to heal anyone, no effort to reduce suffering. It was Frankenstein-level torture with a notepad. These people weren't patients. They were handpicked for pain. Human guinea pigs with no say, no safety, and no chance in hell. And all of it carried out in the name of science. Last on our descent into scientific hell, the Sulfanomide Experiments. This one's particularly messed up because it combined actual torture with the illusion of medicine, like they were cosplaying doctors in a horror film. So here's the setup. The Nazis wanted to test sulfonamides, a type of antibiotic used to treat infections like gangrene, basically the go-to drug for battlefield wounds. Now, if you're a normal human being, you'd test that by studying real cases from actual injured soldiers. But the Nazis? Nah. Instead, they went full evil scientist mode and decided to create the wounds themselves. This went down mostly at Ravensbrück concentration camp, where they targeted prisoners, mainly women, and subjected them to what can only be described as medical assault. Victims were tied down and stabbed, shot, or had their bones smashed with mallets. But wait, it gets worse. Once they had the open wounds, the doctors would deliberately infect them with things like bacteria, tetanus spores, or literal gas gangrene, which makes your flesh rot from the inside. And if that wasn't enough, they'd also rub filth, crushed glass, wood shavings, or rusty nails into the injuries just to simulate a realistic battlefield wound. Spoiler alert, there was nothing realistic about any of it. This was war crime cosplay with a scalpel. Then they'd test sulfa drugs on one group and leave others completely untreated as controls. They were human sacrifices for science points. Some victims had entire chunks of muscle and nerve tissue removed so they could measure healing. Others had limbs amputated after infection spread too far. And no surprise, most of them died, or ended up permanently disabled. But here's the twist that hits like a gut punch. After the war, some of the data from these horrific experiments was actually used by scientists because it was so detailed and, well, no one else was documenting the effects of gangrene this way. And that sparked one of the biggest ethical debates in modern science. Can knowledge born out of pure evil ever be considered useful? Should we even use it? So yeah, the Nazis weren't just villains in a war. They were mad scientists with access to thousands of human test subjects and zero morals. And let's be crystal clear, none of this was okay. Not in the name of medicine, not in the name of war, not ever. So next time someone throws around the word experiment like it's harmless, remember this history. And always, always listen to Dante Dread.